This is Reynolds v. United States. To know more about this case, we also have to get into the backstory. It all starts off with a guy named George Reynolds, which is a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, aka the Mormons. You see, the Mormons had an interesting practice called polygamy. This referred to the fact that they married multiple wives at one time. However, the practice of polygamy was against the social norms and legal restrictions at the time. In an effort to address this practice, the U.S. Congress passed the Morrill Anti-Bigamy Act in 1862, which prohibited polygamy in the territories of the United States. This act affected none other than George Reynolds himself, which resided in the Utah Territory. Reynolds ended up being charged for polygamy under this new law. However, this sparked some issues between Reynolds' beliefs and the law. The topic ended up being so controversial that it ended up all the way up to the Supreme Court, where there he would testify to his argument. He contended that his practice of polygamy was protected under the First Amendment's guarantee of freedom of religion. Reynolds claimed that the government should not interfere with the matters of faith and that individuals should be free to practice their religion without any restrictions or penalties, even if their actions were considered illegal under civil law. At the end, Reynolds believed that the prohibition of polygamy violated his fundamental right to religious freedom and the government had no right to regulate or restrict religious practices.
The defendant in this case would be the United States government, who argued against George Reynolds' claims that his practice of bigamy should be protected as an exercise of his religious freedom. The United States government argued that federal law, specifically the Morrill Anti-Bigamy Act of 1862, prohibited polygamy. It argued that the government had a legitimate interest in regulating marriage practices to protect the institution of marriage and maintain social order. While George Reynolds claimed that polygamy was a religious duty, the government argued that religious beliefs could not be used to justify actions that were criminal under the law. It emphasized that the First Amendment did not grant individuals a blanket of exemption from complying with enacted laws. The government asserted that the First Amendment protection of the free exercise of religion had limits. It argued that the government could regulate or prohibit certain religious practices when they conflicted with law or public policy. Supreme Court ruling. In the end, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the federal government. This was based on the interpretation of the First Amendment, which addresses religious freedom. More specifically, the court cited the First Amendment's Free Exercise Clause as the basis of its decision. The Supreme Court acknowledged the importance of religious freedom, but clarified that the First Amendment's protections of religious practices was not absolute. The court ruled that religious beliefs and practices could not be used as a defense against criminal charges when those practices were in violation of established laws or public policy.
Inside of the courts, we had Chief Justice Morrison Whites, who delivered the opinion of the court on June 5, 1879. The decision was unanimous, 9-0, reaffirming George Reynolds' conviction. Why this case matters and why it is significant is because it established a baseline that the government can regulate religious practices if they violated established governmental laws. It also reinforced the law of separation, the separation of church and state, emphasizing that government laws should apply uniformly to all citizens regardless of their religious beliefs. This highlights a distinct difference between beliefs and practices. Reynolds v. U.S. touches on broader social and moral issues such as the balance between individual rights and the collective good, the role of the government in regulating personal behavior and welfare, and the true definition of the First Amendment's Free Exercise Clause, which is debated even to this day.